Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So 3 weeks ago, I had done a presentation pertaining to this particular topic, and I had called it Part 1. And since it's 3 weeks ago, and a lot of people who were not in that, so I've just prepared the first 2 slides, and I'll go through it by number. I made about 10 points to summarize that Part 1. So starting with number 1, a most relevant and useful approach to understanding the text, the discourse of the Quran, is by means of 2 key concepts developed by Muslim scholars 1,000 years ago. These 2 concepts were context and internal relationships. In terms of modern linguists, they only discovered this thing and developed it a little over 100 years ago. The context, number 2, the context of the specific situation in the Quran determines what and how the Quran speaks in that particular situation. That is the utterance of the Quran. The other key tool in the Quranic interpretation, that is tafsir, besides the context of the situation, is the internal relationships between material in different parts of the Quran, expressed by the Quranic scholars as Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'da, that is, some parts of the Quran explain other parts elsewhere in the Quran. So as Tabari said, what is given in a general way in one place is explained in detail in the other place. What is given briefly in one place is expanded in the other place. Number 4, the context and internal relationships both focus our attention on the Quranic text itself, which most certainly must take priority over any other approach to understanding and explaining the Quran. Now, Professor Abdul Halim, whose book, Understanding the Quran, from which I have taken a chapter that pertains to this particular subject. So he's the author of this discourse. He wrote this book about a quarter of a century ago. He's now 95 years old. He spent about 50 years at least teaching Quranic studies, Quranic Arabic, at the University of London. He has a PhD from Cambridge. And of course, he was Al-Azhar student early on. So he opts to adopt the merciful as his translation of Ar Rahman, the title of this surah. The one who extends, as his translation of Ar Rahman, the one who extends his mercy to his creation in the form of the blessings that have been listed in the verses of this surah. So because the blessings that Allah Ta'ala enumerates in this Quran are an extension of his mercy, so Abdul Halim chooses to translate Ar-Rahman here as the merciful. Elsewhere, the context may require another translation of this, or scholars may vary. So for example, bounteous and several other translations of this title have been given by other scholars. We are talking about here focusing on Abdul Halim's work on this particular subject. So this number 6, this preferred meaning, the merciful for Ar-Rahman, he, Professor Halim, claims is borne out by the context of Surah Ar-Rahman. In other words, he says the mercy that manifests itself into these blessings that are being listed in this surah suggests that the merciful here would be the most apt translation. Number 7, there are 3 sections of this surah. Section 1 is Allah's blessings in this world, and the refrain فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ appears 8 times here. Ayat 1 through 30 deal with this section. They deal with the blessings in this world. In it, ayat number 13 challenges the men and jinn, who are the addressees, for the first time in the surah. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you deny? This challenge, this refrain, is repeated afterwards throughout the surah. Section 2 pertains to the punishment on Judgment Day, and the refrain appears 7 times in this particular section, which comprises ayat 31 through 45. Here, these ayat contain a challenge for men and jinn, the addressees, to escape Allah's judgment. However, as the reader finds that the guilty shall not escape the punishment whose existence they had repeatedly denied, as it was suggested in section 1. Number 9, section 3, rewards on Judgment Day. The refrain appears here 16 times. And ayat 46 through 77 deal with blessings in the rewards of 2 classes of believers. And number 10, there are 3 ayat in this surah. Number 1, number 27, number 20, and number 78, not 28, that's a mistake. These 3 ayats fuse the whole of the Surah Al Rehman into one solid unity. And the signification of these unifying ayat is that they pertain exclusively to Allah. So that is pretty much the summary that was put in here for the last 5-6 minutes of part 1 that lasted about 45-50 minutes. So anybody who wanted to go back to it can do so from the recording that now appears on Fajr Talks and is on YouTube as well. So now we start part 2 of this presentations. And this surah essentially is an illustration of how the Quran explains itself. It is an illustration of how a surah, here Al Rahman, exhibits a particular style of the Quranic text. And the key features of the style embedded in Surah Al Rehman include, and we will see this, resonance, rhyming, that is, throughout the surah. It also will show the tight and condensed structure of the verses. It will show the contrast within and between the verses. And it will also show duality within and between the verses. We will also call it pairing. So we then begin with ayat 1 and 2. Ar-Rahman allama al-Quran. The merciful taught the Quran. Ayat 1, Ar-Rahman, the merciful. This surah is unique in that it is the only surah among 114 surahs of the Quran that begins with one of the names of Allah standing as one separate ayat. This ayat, Ar-Rahman, the merciful, governs the material that follows it by virtue of what Ar-Rahman signifies, the all-merciful, and how the mercy of this all-merciful manifests itself into the blessings for his creation. In other words, the context of this surah is the merciful and his mercy manifested as blessings for his creatures. And it is this context that governs the choice of material as well as the meanings of words and expressions. In this first section of the surah, one observes an enumeration of series of blessings of Ar-Rahman. As well, the expression Ar-Rahman with which the surah opens also governs the material that follows it by the effect of its ending sound, an elongated alif and noon, which sets the pattern of rhyming at the ends of subsequent ayat, mostly an and some am. This results in a pleasing resonance that I alluded to a couple of minutes ago. This rhyming, this resonance helps build a cumulative effect upon the significance and meanings of the blessings coming in as a result of the merciful's mercy. Blessings which are listed in this first section. Moreover, this rhyming and resonance of the ending sound continues throughout the surah, rendering this style of the Quranic text particularly pleasing to the ear. Ayat 2, Allama al-Quran. Allama is a verb. It's in the third tense always. he taught the Quran. And ayat 1 is the subject. Ar Rahman, ayat 1, he taught the Quran, ayat 2. Okay. Since it is through the Quran that we are told about Allah and manifestations of His mercy, teaching the Quran comes first in this surah, stressing the priority and the more lasting effect of the spiritual benefit. Teaching Quran as a mercy is so significant that it was pointed out in the first verses revealed. Read, your Lord is the most bountiful who taught. 96, ayat 3 and 4. And also, He taught you what you did not know. Allah's bounty to you is great indeed. Surah 4, ayat 113. So this is what interrelationships are, okay? Internal relationships. In modern language, intertextuality. Ayat 2, He taught the Quran. 96 and Surah 4 provide you further elaboration on it. He taught what? Taught what you did not know. He started revealing, and right on he said, read, most bountiful who taught. Another observation, since the context of this surah relates to Ar-Rahman, the All-Merciful's bounty, that is blessings, He taught the Quran is used, not the usual He sent the Quran. Here, the context requires that taught the Quran, not He sent the Quran. Why? Because the context of the surah governs the choice of the vocabulary. And so taught the Quran rather than the normal sent the Quran becomes here the more appropriate choice of words. Ayat 3 and 4. Again, the subject is still ayat 1, Ar-Rahman. Ayat 3 and 4, Khalaq al-Insan. He, Ar-Rahman of ayat 1, created man. And Allamahul Bayan. He of ayat 1, Ar-Rahman, taught him, Insan, to communicate. Creating man and teaching him bayan are the next two manifestations of Ar-Rahman's blessings here. Bayan is the ability to express oneself and to understand what others express. Khalaq al-insan, blessing. Allamahul bayan, he taught and provided the ability to express your own self and to understand what others express. Note now how internal relationships come into play by referencing the following ayat from other parts of the Quran. In Surah 90, did we not give him eyes, a tongue, and lips? He's referring here to bayan, ability to express oneself through your senses and to understand what others express through their senses. Surah 67, it is He who brought you into being, He who endowed you with hearing, sight, and understanding. These are the means through which we end up communicating. And yet, what small thanks you give. So these are the elements of internal relationships, which, along with the context, is how the Quran explains itself. Ayat 5. Ash-shamsu wal-qamaru bi-husban. The sun and the moon follow their calculated courses. Husban bi-husban, follow their calculated courses. Now, remember, for ayat 2, 3, and 4, ayat 1, Ar-Rahman was the subject. Ar-Rahman did this, Ar-Rahman did this, Ar-Rahman did that. He taught, he created, he taught the bayan. Note now how in ayat 5, the style of the Quran changes in this surah. It is the sun and the moon that are the subject. It moves now from Ar-Rahman, it now moves to sun and the moon. They become the subject. Ar-Rahman taught, create. Note how here they are the subjects. It is they, the sun and the moon, who follow their courses. So where is Ar-Rahman's blessing for man here? Let us look for internal relationships. Where were you when we needed you, Shams? So ayat 5 statement is expanded to show the benefits of the sun and the moon and the exact way they follow their course in such verses as Surah 10, Ayat 5, Surah 6, Ayat 96, Surah 36, 40. Okay. Now look at it. Ash-shamsu wal-qamaru bihusban. The sun and the moon follow their calculated courses. Very succinct, but very condensed, very concentrated. And here are three other internal relationships. So for example, for instance, in Surah 10, Ayat 5, it is he who made the sun a source of shining radiance and the moon a light reflected, and has determined for it phases so that you might know the number of years and how to calculate time. Allah does not create all this without a true purpose. He explains his signs to those who understand. Look at the internal relationship. You came and cross-reference within the Quran itself, and you find an elaboration of this ayat find, which is so beautifully condensed here. The sun and the moon follow their courses. Ash-shamsu wal-qamaru bihusban. Khalas. You go there, other surahs, other instances. Here it tells you why the sun and moon do what they do, follow their courses. And it shows you there. Ayat 6, وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The plants and the trees prostrate to Allah's designs. Okay, hold on. Najmu. وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The plants and the trees prostrate to Allah's designs. One may find at least 8 separate words that come from 3 root letters of Noon, Jim, and Mim. Here, Najm, in the context of this surah, is translated as plants that have no stem or trunk, in contrast to the tree, that is the shajar, which appears in this ayat, that has the trunk. Both the trunkless plants and the trunked trees prostrate to Allah in following their course He created for them, just as the believers prostrate and submit in prayer. This is seen in greater detail in 22:18, internal relationships again. Do you not realize that everything in the heavens and the earth prostrates to Allah, the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the trees, and animals? Now, many commentators have translated Najm here as stars. However, what we have here in Ayat 5 and 6 is a contrast between 2 celestial, heavenly objects, sun and moon in Ayat 5, and then 2 earthly objects, trees and plants in Ayat 6. See the thing? Ayat 5, celestial objects, 2. Ayat 6, earthly objects, 2. Plants without trunks, trees with trunks. The stars doesn't fit here. Celestial objects in Ayat 5, earthly objects, Ayat 6. The context therefore dictates that one chooses an earthly object, and the plants without trunk comes right in and suits very well, joining in as a pair with the trees with trunk. The context here in A6 dictates the meaning plants, an earthly object, with another earthly object, trees, rather than stars, a celestial object. This stylistic yet purposeful feature of contrast, remember this was the other thing I had shown you in the beginning, several key features in the style of the surah. Contrast continues throughout the surah. Sun, moon, contrast, okay? Plants without trunks, trees with trunks, contrast, okay? This is the beauty. It just comes in and flows so automatically, unless and until a scholar analyzes, he sees the charm of how the selection, how the contrast appears. So here we saw the contrast, celestial objects, earthly objects, sun, moon, earth, not earth, the trees and the plants, and the sun and the moon. So let's go on. As well, note another yet feature of this surah, dualism. Ar-Rahman taught man. Ar-Rahman created man. Ar-Rahman taught man, bayan. Sun, moon, plants, trees. Dualism also persists throughout as a contrast does. Dualism, contrast. Those are the two features I had highlighted in the beginning. Note yet another observation about ayat 5 and 6. In these four items, sun, moon, plants, and trees are singled out early on in the surah, suggesting that in addition to there being four examples of Allah's blessings, these four items serve as a model of submission to Allah for the addressees that are still to come, the men and jinn, who may deny Allah's blessings. So look at the structure. Four objects have been highlighted. Yasjudan, prostrate, and the other one was bihusban, follow their calculated courses. Four inanimate objects brought in early on as examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahman is saying, look, these I'm bringing to your attention, they submit to me. And then he's going to come and say, you are getting all these blessings and you are going to deny these favors? Look how strategically placement has been made for these four in the surah before he begins to address mankind. Ayat 7 through 12. He has raised up the sky. He has set the balance so that you may not exceed the balance. Weigh with justice and do not fall short in balance. We'll go through it. He set down the earth for his creatures with its fruits, its palm trees with sheathed clusters, its husked grain, its fragrant plants. Okay, now stay with me. In these ayat, one sees the manifestations of Ar-Rahman, the merciful's blessings, in the way how he keeps, now listen to this, in the way how he keeps the heavens up. He has raised up the sky and the earth stable. He set down the earth. Okay. He has raised up the sky. He set down the earth. The duality, heavens and earth, and the contrast, heavens and earth. Heavens are raised high so they do not fall on his creatures. Interrelationships from elsewhere in the Quran, ayat 2, Surah 13. It is Allah who has raised up the heavens with no visible supports. Surah 21, ayat 32. And we made the sky a well-secured canopy. Ayat 65, Surah 22. Have you not considered how Allah keeps the heavens from falling down on the earth without his permission? So here is the internal relationships. It pertains to, it says more about, he has raised up the sky in ayat 7, and I believe it's ayat 10. He set down the earth for his creatures. Raised up the heavens, uplifted, rather than the usual, created the heavens. It suits the context here. Raised up the heavens, uplifted, suits the context here. He raised the heavens high, but he did not cut his creatures from them. He sent down from these heavens scriptures and the balance. Look at 42:17. It is Allah who has sent down the scripture with the truth and the balance. Note here now, ayat 7, he has raised up the sky. Ayat 10, he set down the earth. Even before the earth is mentioned, the balance, mizan, is set up. And the passage stresses the importance of keeping a just balance with no excess. See that way with justice, it just intersperses that one. Stresses the importance of keeping a just balance with no excess, no deficiency. And that becomes a fitting introduction to the repeated question of this surah, which will come in Surah Ayat 13, which then of your sustainer blessing shall you deny? Why? because justice demands that the addressees who are still to come recognize the blessings, mercies of the merciful, which surrounds them from every direction, from up above and all around. Elsewhere in the Quran, falling short in the balance has a concrete significance, okay, elsewhere. But in the context of Surah Al Rehman, however, balance has been brought in here as an additional meaning of due recognition of balance is Allah's blessing. In other words, Mizan has been brought here as a blessing. It is a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings Mizan to you. It is not just a balance as is being discussed elsewhere in the Quran in its own significance, but here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's Ar-Rahman's, one of Ar-Rahman's blessing that comes to you, and it has been put between the heavens and the earth. Now, the repetition of the word balance, al-mizan, appears in 7, 8, and 9. Mizan, balance, appears in 7, 8, and 9. It is especially effective in this context, coming soon after Bihusban, perfectly calculated courses of sun and moon in ayat 5, to reinforce the sense of exactitude and balance in Allah's creation. And in the well-ordered structure of this surah, this repetition of balance al-mizan also heightens the demand for just dealing. Note as well in this context the verb wada'a, okay? Set up, he has raised up, wada'a. Set up is used with al-mizan, balance, rather than anzala. Did not bring down, he set up. Why? Because it has been done so in order to emphasize the significance of balance here. Furthermore, using the same word wada'a in ayat 10 with the earth, al-ard, highlights the crucial importance of maintaining balance on earth. See how he chooses the word wada'a here rather than anzala, which appears in ayat 17 of Surah 42. So the merciful Ar-Rahman is a manifestation of his mercy and a blessing, and as a blessing, keeps the sky from falling down on its creatures, makes the earth stable underneath them. Note the contrast and note the duality. And it is done here in quite a condensed form. Ayat 7, Ayat 10. Raised up the sky, set down the earth. By way of internal relationships, we are made to appreciate the significance of the condensed statement here by referencing elsewhere in the Quran in such expanded versions as, if we wished, we could make the earth swallow them or make fragments from the sky, heavens fall down upon them. Ayat 9, Surah 34. And he has made mountains stand firm on the earth to prevent it shaking under you. Okay. Over here, very tight. He has raised up the sky, he set down the earth. Here are various illustrations, Quran explaining itself. Internal relationships, Quran explaining itself. We have not referred to any hadith, we have not referred to any sunnah, nothing. Quran is explaining itself. We have to go through and find the internal relationship while keeping the context of the subject in front of us. In the context of the earth, 11 and 12, we have the balance of fruits and palm trees, ayat 11, as well as the balance of grain and fragrant plants, Rayhan, in ayat 12. Dhat al-akmam, sheathed, that is the covering in ayat 11, and dhul husked in ayat 12, are two nicely balanced details which demonstrate that the palm and the corn are still in the stage of promise, sheathed, husked, still depend on Ar-Rahman's mercy to bring them to fruition, which again suits the context. See the beauty of it? Fruits and the palm trees, balance of grain and fragrant plants, but they are sheathed, husked, They're still in the stage of promise. They are still to manifest themselves fully into the corn and the grain. In ayat 10, Allah's creatures, He set down the earth for His creatures, include men and jinn. Okay, the creatures in ayat 10 include men and jinn. They are not called out as such yet and are subsequently mentioned directly for the first time in ayat 14. Through these 12 ayats that we have looked at so far, men and jinn have been shown the homilies, the moralizing discourse of Ar Rahman and manifestations of the Merciful's mercy and bounties surrounding them from above, below, and all around them. In ayat 13 now, they are addressed in dual form, kuma, duality again. See the duality appearing again, kuma. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا, you two, plural, not plural, pair. Okay. In Arabic, it's plural is two ways. One is for pair, one is for more than two. رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ an. This is again for pairs. Which then of your sustainers' blessings, favors, mercies do you both deny? Notice here that there is a shift here. The shift is now from his. So far we were looking at his third person, ayat 1 through 12. Now the noun your sustainer, second person. Your Lord, second person noun comes in. See, it's in the style of the surah. It's in the style of the Quran. Moves from third person through 12, 13 person, 13th surah, ayat, second person. Your Lord. This is iltifat. You will read more about iltifat if you go into details. A style of the Quran that is unique to it. And it is significant here because, pay attention to this, it is significant here because Rabb is related to the verb rabba, to bring up, to care for, to sustain some words. In other words, your lordship here is a caring lordship. How often have you thought about this? Rabbika, Rabbikuma. It is a caring lordship. It's not just any lord. It's a caring lord. This is why that lord, when it starts manifesting, you think about the colonial empire's lords. No, this comes from Rabba to sustain someone. Here, it is your caring lordship that he's talking about, that the Quran is talking about. The question, the refrain, which then, coming after enumeration of those blessings surrounding men, is a rhetorical question that can be rightly called a cornering challenge to men. It makes any denial vis-a-vis Ar-Rahman's favors, his blessings, utterly futile. This is now your caring Lord, Rabbikuma, showing your folly and your ingratitude. By way of internal relationship, such a challenge to deny the much obvious blessings and signs of Ar-Rahman is referred to elsewhere in the Quran. Here are several of these instances. Internal relationships, again, Quran explaining itself. So in Surah Al-Najm, ayat 55, about which then of your sustainers' favors do you still remain in doubt at the Marra? The function of this question, this refrain, this rhetorical refrain, which is stated in part one of this presentation, appears 31 times in Rahman. It is that of a concluding formula, if you will. After the first appearance here in ayat 13, from here on, this concluding formula in the form of a refrain marks the end of a pair. Only when a pair is completed, there is this concluding refrain, which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Note that the refrain appears for the first time just before the addresses. Men and jinn, referred to in the word al-anam, creatures in ayat 10, make a clear appearance in ayat 14. Ayat 14 through 16, he created mankind out of dried clay like pottery, the jinn out of smokeless fire. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Okay. Where is the pair here? Mankind, jinn. That's the pair. Pair got completed, refrain follows. The content of 14 through 16, 16th, of course, is the refrain. So 14 and 15 is so condensed. He created mankind out of dry clay like pottery, the jinn out of smokeless fire. That's all this ayat says. It is so condensed that Ar-Rahman's blessings may not be apparent. One needs to look elsewhere in the Quran for internal relationships that clarify the process of creation. Here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 cross relationship, internal relationship. In these ayats, humans as well as jinn are reminded of their origin and how Ar-Rahman in his bounty developed them into what they are now. Human rather than clay. Contrast. Jinn rather than fire. If it were not for his merciful bounty, that they would not have arrived at their present state. The sky would not have been raised up, kept raised up. The earth would not have remained stable. The two types of water that will come later would not have been kept separate and distinct from each other, nor would the ships have stayed afloat and sailed. This reveals yet another duality, origin and the present state. See the beauty of this? The duality, the contrast. It is absolutely marvelous. 17 through 18. 18 is a refrain. He is the Lord of the two rising and the Lord of the two settings. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Now pay attention how Abdul Halim interprets this. He interprets this ayat 17 unlike most other commentators who express it as where the sun rises and sets and the moon rises and sets. We are familiar with that. Abdul Halim suggests that the reference here is to the two extreme points where the sun rises in the winter and the sun rises in the summer, and where it sets in the winter and it sets in the summer. This phenomenon illustrates the merciful's yet another merciful blessing in the variations of the seasons as well as the length of the day and night. Selection of extreme points makes one realize Ar-Rahman's mercy in not making the nighttime endless or the daytime endless. So, it is so tightly condensed here. He's the Lord of the two rising and two settings. So this tight condensation, condensing by the structure and the demands of the surah's context is such that one needs to cross-reference and compare it with 73:9, Lord of the East and West, 70:40, Lord of the East and West, and particularly ayats 71 through 73 in Surah 28 to appreciate ayat 17 significance, the Lord of the two rising, the Lord of the two settings. Look at this cross-reference. Say, have you ever considered this? If Allah had willed that there should always be night about you without break until the day of resurrection, is there any deity other than Allah that could have brought you light? Will you not then listen to the truth? Say, have you considered this? If Allah had willed that there should always be daylight about you without break until the day of resurrection, is there any deity that could bring you the darkness of night in which you might rest? Will you not then see the truth? For it is out of His grace, His mercy, His blessings that He has made for you the night and the day, so that you might rest therein, as well as seek to obtain what you need of His bounty during the daytime. And He gave you all this so that you might have a reason to be grateful. The Quran explaining ayat 17 through Surah 28, ayat 71, 72, 73, internal relationships. See, we haven't gone outside of the Quran. Up to this point, Ar-Rahman's blessings have pertained to land. This next segment deals with water. Ayat 19, 20. 21, of course, is the refrain. He released two bodies of water. Two bodies of water implied fresh as well as salt. They meet, yet there is a barrier between them that they do not cross. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Fresh and salt water, rivers and seas do not overrun each other. While they do not overrun each other, you see the contrast, you see the duality. Notice how the single ayat A17 completed a pair. 17. If you went to go 17, it completed the pair. Lord of the two risings, Lord of the two settings, and then the refrain, which then came in. Unlike that, here, a single ayat 19 does not complete a pair of blessings. For a pair to be completed, ayat 20 comes in, running waters that meet but are kept distinct. Once the pair is completed with two ayat as opposed to one ayat in 17, then the refrain follows. Okay? So you may get confused by ayat 17, one ayat, then the refrain came. Here, two ayat, then the refrain comes. The pair has to be completed for you to get that refrain. This is the beauty. 22, 23. Pearls come forth from them, large ones and small, brilliant ones. Small, brilliant ones for marjan. Okay, I'll talk to you about that. And of course, ayat 23, which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Pearls come forth from them, large ones and small, brilliant ones, the pair. 22, 23 comprise the second cycle of blessings related to the sea. Ayat 22 and Ayat 58 as well later on in the surah translate marjan has small, brilliant pearls, while most translators have opted coral for marjan. Majority of commentators explain that marjan denotes small pearls which are much more brilliant. Meanwhile, many commentators have struggled with Ayat 22. They have asserted that pearls come only from salt water, while Ayat 22 states that they come from both salt and fresh water. However, if one were to cross-reference, again, internal relationship, however, if one were to cross-reference to Surah 35, Ayat 12, for instance, one would readily have an explicit Quranic statement that pearls come, min kullin, from each of the two kinds of water. Now, commenting on various commentators' insistence that pearl come only from salt water, Razi, an eminent scholar, his sole interpretation at that point was, accept the manifest word of Allah, that is, pearl come from both waters. Okay, that's where he rested. Here is what is known today. Freshwater mussels in the temperate zone of northern hemisphere have produced pearls of great value. Freshwaters. Pearling is still a carefully nurtured industry in Central Europe, and the forest streams of Bavaria in particular are the source of choice pearls. Freshwater pearling in China has been known from before 1000 BC. The Quranic statement in Ayat 22 of Surah Al Rehman then stands steady with its manifest meaning, supported by other Quranic references and in harmony with the duality of the context, fresh and salt water, distinct, ayat 1920, and pearls from fresh and salt water, ayat 22. It does not need any forced interpretations. It stands firm in spite of the belief that is current amongst commentators that pearls come only from salt water. 24, 25. His are the moving ships that float high as mountains on the sea. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? This is the third and the last pair of blessings connected with the sea. Ships, their size and weight notwithstanding, do not sink but rather sail along. Notice the condensed description, al-jawaril munsha'at, running and raised, just two words. Internal relationship, here is observed when considering the expanded version in ayah 32, 33 of Surah 42, which brings out its full significance. One part of Quran explaining another. Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'da. 32, 33 of Surah 42. Among his signs are the ships, sailing like floating mountains. If he willed, he could bring wind to a standstill, and they would lie motionless on the surface of the sea. Truly, there are signs in this for anyone who is steadfast and thankful. I'm here going to divert here for a minute. I have done about close to 20 cruises. These ships are 20 stories tall. They weigh thousands of tons, and they still sail when there is no wind. And you say, how does that fit in with what we just said here? He says that if we brought the wind to standstill, they would lie motionless on the surface of the sea. Well, here it is. Motionless? No, it's still going on. There is no wind. It's still going on. It's tens of thousands of times weightier and taller than those small boats that have been being referred to 1450 years. Well, you go into the origin. Where did you get that intellect from? You were just clay. He evolved you to where you are today. And if it were not for his mercy, you would still be standing still if there was no wind on the sea. And yet it is that intellect, that blessing, that makes that cruise ship float. I went to Antarctica. Wallahi, the waves had 50, 60 feet heights. And I was taking a walk outside. Subhanallah. This is what man's intellect is able to bring you to. And we just forget all about it, as if it's a take for granted blessing, as if he's not Ar Rahman. Ayat 26, 28. Everyone on earth perishes. Ayat 26. All that remains is the face of your Lord. 28. Full of majesty, bestowing honor. All of this, 26 and 27, and then 28 is the refrain. Which then of your Lord's blessing do you both deny? The statement in ayat 26 could have simply read, all of you men and jinn are perishing, right? All of you men and jinn are perishing, rather than everything on earth perishes. But here the reference to earth is deliberate. It makes the statement more emphatic and recalls the earlier reference to earth in ayat 19 as stabilized, remember? Stabilized and provided with all that is necessary for life. Now here, note also how the statement says here in 826, it binds the structure firmly with in keeping with statements elsewhere. For example, in 2024, where the earth, flourishing of the earth is followed by reference to the last day. If you go to this ayat 24 in Surah 10, you will see the flourishing of the earth is followed by reference to the last day, as it implies here as well. Everyone on earth heretofore stable, ayat 19, perishes, ayat 26, and only the face of the Lord remains full of majesty, bestowing honor at the onset of the day of resurrection. I showed an internal relationship, and I showed why the earth is mentioned in 26 as perishing, everything on earth perishing, versus ayat 19, he, when he chose to, made that earth stable for you. Now, he's perishing this earth, okay? Ikram, Zul Jalal wal Ikram. Ikram in ayat 27 has largely been translated by most translators as honor. Its root verb akrama, however, is in the causative form, which means to give honor and bounty. And so here the translation, bestowing honor, is the more suitable. There you'll find several translations says majesty, full of honor. No. Full of majesty, bestowing honor upon his creatures. Yet another blessing coming in. In Zul Jalal wal Ikram, Ikram here is bestowing honor. We are not talking about honor per se, bestowing honor in causative form, akrama. It comes from verb 4, style 4. Note again the contrasting pairs in 26-27. The world perishing, Ar-Rahman's face abiding. A further pair is made up of His Majesty on one hand and His giving honor upon His creation, humankind, on another. Internal relationships, here are three references. 26-27's pairing, passing away those on earth, and the permanence of Allah, yabqa, indeed determines the structure of the rest of the surah. The pairing necessarily means that all will return to Him for judgment. By way of internal relationship, witness here. Do not call out to any other deity beside Allah, for there is no deity but Him. Everything will perish except His face. His is the judgment, and Him you shall be brought back. Indeed, Ar-Rahman's Jalal, Ikram, His majesty, His power to bestow honor, brought out here at this point in the surah, points to the variety of fates waiting the judgment. This is what the repeated refrain specifying Allah, favors, blessings, and tukadhiban, do you both deny, was bound to lead. Your favors enumerated again and again and again, and you both denying again and again and again. Well, here it comes, perished everything. His majesty remains. And here you are, all of a sudden, standing here on the judgment day. This was bound to lead, and it does lead there. Now, by way of ending section 1 of Surah Al Rehman, blessings of Ar Rahman, and seamlessly moving to sections 2 and 3, which obviously we are not going to do today, which pertain to the judgment day, are the following ayat 29 and 30. 1 through 28, beautifully closed by ayat 27. 29 and 28 was, of course, the refrain. 29 and 30. Everyone in heaven and on earth pleads with Him, entreats with Him. Yes, Allah. And every day He, Ar-Rahman, manifests Himself in yet another wondrous way. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? The pairing here in ayat 829 is between the pleading of humankind and Ar-Rahman's attention to these entities' pleadings. We plead, we entreat, He manifests Himself in yet another wondrous way. He's working for us. He's working for us. Internal relationships, again, may be observed in Surah 14, where similar to section 1 of Surah Al Rehman, ayat 34, there concludes an enumeration of Allah's blessings in this world. If you go to Surah 14, prior ayat to 34, you will get a similar enumeration. And then look how 34 ends, similar to here. And given you some of everything you asked Him for. If you tried to count Allah's favor upon you, you could never calculate them. Everyone in here is pleading, but you never counted them. Look, if you tried to count Allah's favors, you could never calculate them. And yet, behold, man is indeed most persistent in wrongdoing. He's stubbornly ungrateful. The pleadings of man on the one hand, Allah's answer on the other in ayat 29. This pairing, as we may note, follows Surah Al Rehman section 1, His favors in this world, His favors dealing with this world. And it precedes the part of the surah that leads to the next world at the onset of Judgment Day, ayat 31 through 77. Observe yet another pairing. Here, this world, and hereafter, the next world. This key observation suggests that the needs of human beings and Ar-Rahman's attention to them exist in both the worlds, here and hereafter. Subhanallah. Now, you will have noticed that I have mentioned in the past part 1, and I have summarized here, that there are 3 ayat that pertain exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are ayat 1, 27 and 78. The first ayat of the surah, the last ayat of the surah, and ayat 27, which we discussed here. وَيَبْقَى رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. It is so beautifully placed at the end of all those enumeration, and then saying, you continue to deny those favors, and now here, all of that is gone, all is perished. Here you are standing, and look, what is there? The countenance of your Creator. And He stands here, and you stand in front of Him. And now it is the day of reckoning. You denied. I told you 31 times in Surah Al Rehman, and you denied. You are standing here. Subhanallah.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت. اللهم اغفرنا برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الجهل والوهم إلى نور العلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم أوزعنا أن نشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علينا وعلى والدينا وأن نعمل صالحا ترضاه. اللهم اصلحنا في ذريتنا إنا تبنا إليك وإننا من المسلمين. Oh Allah, spread your mercy upon us, shower us with your blessings, increase our knowledge, grant us forgiveness, and reward us with the company of the prophets in the Firdaus al-A'la. Oh Allah, forgive our parents and all our friends and relatives who have passed away. Oh Allah, make their graves a garden from heaven and the grand in the Firdaus al-A'la. Oh Allah, we have many of our friends and relatives who are sick. We have our son Ma'raj, our daughter Aisha Wani, and many others. Oh Allah, grant all of them full and sweet recovery. Oh Allah, guide our children, protect them, and make them righteous. Oh Allah, grant us the power and the ability that we may be grateful for the favor you have bestowed upon us and our parents, and that we may do righteous deeds that are pleasing to you. Oh Allah, we ask you every name you have elected for yourself, that none of us leave this gathering, but his pains have been relieved, his worries have been removed, his debts have been paid, his weaknesses have been concealed, his sins have been forgiven, and his needs have been fulfilled. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Wal asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.